All right, so now as we time this animation out, we have to think about um, creating a sense of pacing, creating a sense of believable motion. And I would say that if I tried to get the brick to just fall right away, the audience wouldn't have enough time to kind of take the scene in and to recognize that there was even a brick there. So I want there to be a little bit of a pause. It could be as short as even a second, so like 24 frames at the beginning, but I don't want there to be motion from frame one onwards. So what I'm going to do, there's two ways you could do this. You could hold down Shift and select all of the frames there on the timeline and simply move them down. Right? That's one way to do it. Or I could do it in my graph editor as well. Ultimately, I need a longer timeline, so I'm just going to set this out to maybe 100 frames for now. I will probably go back and forth and do this in a variety of different ways. So for now, I'm just going to select everything there. I'm going to bring frame 1 down to frame 24. Or maybe even frame 25, because I'll let a full second pass before I start again. All right, so already, actually, hold on. Make sure that my playback speed is set to real time. There we go. Already, we're letting a little bit of a delay happen at the beginning of this animation. And then we do everything, right? So now we got to space everything else out. So we got to think about how long, first off, would it take to do the full action from going here down to there, that contact. And from that, we can probably figure out the rest of our, rest of our animation. So let's just say that maybe that fall takes about 12 frames. It's half a second. All right, so let's say that, all right, we need to make sure that frame 28 is 12 frames after the fall begins. So that means that frame 28 should come out to frame 37. I'm going to grab frame 28 and everything beyond it and drag that down to frame 37. All right, so we get some other stuff happening here right at the beginning, first off, and we just got to think about how long would these take. I don't have definitive numbers here. I'm just kind of going off the top of my head. So perhaps, it's going to be going a little bit slowly at the beginning. We don't want to be rushing it necessarily. That we might actually have a little bit of a delay on that first frame here. Let's say that maybe it takes maybe about 6 frames to get going. All right, so to just kind of start rotating out like that, because we want to go in and control this spacing as well. We want it to not be fast right away. It just needs to feel like the brick all of a sudden just starts falling, right? And then the next one, it could be just a frame later, maybe. We could leave it like that and see what it looks like. All right, so I'm just going to leave it as that for now. So now we've already started to pace out our animation. Let's just see what that looks like in its current form. Okay, we're starting to feel it. Okay, hard to tell exactly, but we're starting to feel it. Now, how about the next ones? Now I know that when this guy hits the ground here, or hits the table edge, and it goes smack down like that, that might be maybe too few frames. I think it might take at least one other frame to complete that smackdown. And if anybody thought that was funny, I appreciate it. So 36 to 38, cool. Now that's also got to start rotating down like this, and I'm not really sure how long that's going to take. We're going to just sort of leave it as maybe 1 frame, and then it starts to peel away. Let's just say that maybe that takes 2 frames. So let's pull that out 1 more frame like that. And then, of course, it's going down. And let's give it, it's not quite as big of a leap as before. So let's give that to there, there to there. Let's give it at least maybe 6 frames. Bring that to 48. And then we get a little bit of a snap to the end there. So that'll probably just be 1 frame. All right, so we won't really know if this is working totally properly until we watch it with some spacing in between, but we can give ourselves kind of an idea. I'll get rid of this locator as well because we don't really need that anymore. All right, let's watch that. Don't actually need this animation to be really longer than 60 frames now. Okay, starting to get an idea of what it's going to look like. So now that we've given a basic indication of what is our spacing going to be, now we can go in and start creating, now that we give a basic indication of what our timing is going to be, we can go in and create our spacing. So let's first save this. We're going to save this scene as, and I'm going to call this my, normally I would go in and have a stage I call linear, where I use linear tangents to clean everything up. And I could still do that here, but I think we could probably just be okay in this animation to go in straight to spline mode. So I'm going to call this block animation spline 01. There we go. And so what I'm going to do is go into my graph editor. So Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. And I'm also going to go into my animation settings. And in the animation settings, I'm going to make sure that weighted tangents is still on, but I'm going to change my default in and out tangents to spline. If I should happen to create any additional keyframes now, I want to make sure that they are in the same tangent type that I'm converting everything else to. I don't want them to stay clamped and stepped, for example. All right, so I'll grab all the brick controls. I don't actually need to have the NURBS curves visible in order to grab them, since I have this cool feature up here now. And let's go in and grab all of those curves, and we're going to convert them to spline tangents. Now that's going to create some issues for us, which we'll see momentarily, but it will be fine to start with. So now as we watch this, here's what we get. Let's just play it back. Okay, starting to get a sense of that motion. Some things may feel a little bit fast. That fall, for instance, feels a little bit fast. Obviously, we have some issues here where the brick interpenetrates. And I just want to talk about some of the issues that we're going to have in the Spline Editor in general. So basically, when I'm looking at the Spline Editor, I try to figure out what's the most important control, what's the most important thing that governs the motion of my object, and work on all of the curves associated with that control first, and then I work back to what's the next most important thing. All right, so right now if I look at translate, if I actually turn on the curves, right, if I look at the translate control here, for instance, right, I can see that this is what I get. Now, I think that if I'm looking at this here, you can see that this brick is meant to be just holding still over this period of time. It's not meant to be moving anywhere. This is currently looking at translate Y because it's green. And if I actually watch this here, I might see that there's actually a little bit of a jostling that happens in the translate. So I really want to make sure that from here to here, it's flat. Right? And then from here to here, it doesn't do this weird sort of out thing. So I'm going to grab that and I'm going to break that tangent so I can better control it. Okay, cool. And I'm just going to go through this whole graph. And as I'm going through the graph, I'm just kind of looking at what's happening in the animation. All right, so the brick is falling there. It hits the ground. Right, and the very next frame that we see here, we have this weird sort of translation down right here. This could be an indication that we get a problem here. I don't think that that necessarily is straight, but let's pull this back. I'm going to break these two tangents as well and pull that back up there for sure, and we'll try to even that out. Let's give that a see if that works. We might have an issue here. We're going to find out. But I'm trying to make sure that I don't end up with any what we call spline overshoots. Like if I know, for instance, that we have a value here and we have a value that's just slightly below it here, between those two values, we shouldn't have anything that goes below the lowest one unless there's a keyframe there. Which means that I need to come in here and probably do a little bit of editing. I'm going to flatten that one out there. I can grab this and break it and pull it back just a little bit. That's going to be better. And I would do that on all of our splines. So this one here, I know right at the beginning, if I rewind, there shouldn't be any motion at all, really, very minimal amounts of motion. So that right there, that can be flat. Right. So this is translate X, I believe. What did we have before I did that? Okay, so just a very minimal amount of motion there. They're pretty much the same value, I think. 1.231, 1.231. Yeah, that should be flat. Cool. And again, just kind of keeping track here, making sure they're not doing anything weird, not doing any spline overshoots. Even though this is probably just one frame, I don't really want it to still do that, because if I started moving this, like if I move this forward to another frame, for instance, I'm still going to end up with that spline overshoot. So I'll grab that one and say flat. That is 1.224, so is that, which means that this should be flat as well. Right, so it just kind of, you know, just using my brain right now to try to figure out what should be just fixed up because of the nature of the corruption that spline tangents give us. Flatten that there. I can flatten that there and that. There's no overshoots. And I'm not really looking at what's happening in the animation at the moment, which is a little bit dangerous. But I'm doing a little bit of curve maintenance first. And then I can go back in and really try to tackle what's happening in the animation. So, you know, I'll say that the translate control here is probably the most significant part of the animation. It has the biggest effect on the movement. And then the next biggest thing is probably actually this guy here. But I'm gonna, before I go to that one, I'm gonna actually go to the brick orient control, just because it's pretty easy to see where there's some issues. This is where there's that snapping, where it's going from rotating from 90 degrees to another position. So I'm just gonna flatten that out there. So we'll flatten all those out there so that we don't end up with the issue of overshooting. Cool. So now just look at what we have. It's actually, you know, we can play it back now and just see what is the effect of everything that we've done. Okay. Obviously, some things still need to be looked into. Some issues with the timing as well. But now let's also go in and look at our brick pivot control. So this is basically only translates and rotates, I believe. Let's just see. Okay. Does that give me anything else? Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. No. Cool. So maintenance. Let's scrub through it as we go here. Now, because this is the primary axis of rotation, and I want the brick to start rotating slowly, and it's rotating around Y, which is why it's green here, I would say that this should be rotating slowest at the beginning and gradually picking up speed, which means that we'll probably start out by having no motion whatsoever. So I can just kind of make it flat to begin with and play around with the curves here just to slow it out a little bit, right, and ease it into that rotation. Okay. Now, as that brick falls, it will continue to rotate, and then it's going to all of a sudden hit the ground and change direction. Now, ultimately, as this brick is rotating, it shouldn't be coming toward a stop here, because it's not anticipating that it's going to hit the ground. By this slowing down here, becoming more horizontal, it indicates that it actually looks like it's trying to anticipate that it's going to stop rotating. We don't want that. I want this to continue going at a faster speed, or at least a continuous speed. So we'll leave it something like that for now. And there's going to be an abrupt shift, right, in the opposite direction, which is why it's basically going to be kind of a point here. Cool. Now we got a big change that happens right here, which is slightly complex. And several things happen simultaneously that might need to be addressed because we get issues like that. Come back to that in just a moment. First off, I'm just going to make sure I flatten that out there. And probably the rest of that looks okay. So we'll come back to the big issue in just a moment. Is there anything else here? There should be some translate on this guy. Right? Yes, there should be. Oh, up here. There we go. Aha. Okay, so let's quickly look at those translates as well. Translate Y will be nothing, apparently. Translate X. Let's go back to the start. Translate X is our forward direction, I believe. Let's just see what that does. Translate X is, yeah, forward direction. Cool. So, according to this graph, that's fine, okay. We get these weird little dips and bobs here. It's simply because as we rotate or move the pivot control from one location to another to create an alternative pivot, the curve itself does some weird things just to be able to, I guess, align that correctly based on or I should say respective to what else the brick is doing. Don't worry, it probably sounds more confusing than I need to make it. Okay, so right now we have a big overshoot that we don't necessarily need. So if we look at this, like where there's that big overshoot right there, let's go in and try to flatten this out. I'm going to grab that guy, break him, and flatten. We'll flatten that side as well, because I believe that is the same value. Yep, they're both 0. So when I did that, just stepping back, there's a slight change, but it's probably an appropriate one. Okay, now we have a situation where this hits the ground, or hits this ledge, and there we go. Pops in like that. Those are more or less in the same location, but just because I don't want them to be overshooting each other. So when that comes down, that's good. Okay, that should be fine. Again, the same situation here. I'm going to flatten that one. Cool, that looks better. Translate Y is nothing on it, and translate Z, kind of the same story. So it's probably okay. Flatten these guys. Just make sure that doesn't overshoot there. And flatten these guys. Cool. All right, now let's see what that gives us overall. Okay, starting to look better. So I'm just going to pause the video here, and we'll continue the cleanup phase in the next video.